Naidoo, can you give us an understanding of the current legal framework around corporal punishment in schools?
When you look at the legal framework that underpins corporal punishment in South Africa, one has to start with the supreme law, and the supreme law is the Constitution of South Africa. This Constitution of South Africa is very direct. Everyone has a right not to be treated or punished in a cruel, inhuman or degrading way. So the Constitution is clear, and that is section 12. As part of the Constitution, we also look at chapter 2, which deals with the Bill of Rights. Now, according to the Bill of Rights, we find various sections that deal with corporal punishment, aspects of corporal punishment. The first one is section 10, which clearly states everyone has inherent dignity and all have the right to have their dignity respected and protected. Further on to section 12, which says everyone has the right to freedom and security of the person, which includes the right not to be treated or punished in a cruel, inhuman or degrading way. The best interest of the child shall be paramount in any matter pertaining to a child. So when you look at the next legislation, arising out of democracy came the South African Schools Act 84 of 1996. The SASA, which is a shortened version of South African Schools Act, speaks to corporal punishment being abolished. With the advent of democracy, corporal punishment is no longer relevant to disciplining learners, students at school. If you look at the next piece of legislation, I would say another important one would be the Educator Employment Act of 1996. We find that this act deals with educator behavior, and when we deal with educator behavior, it speaks directly to misconduct on the part of educators. There are two sections in the EEA, which is section 17 and section 18. And I think all South African teachers should be fully au fait with the contents of this legislation, because in any contravention of that legislation can lead to serious consequences. The next piece of legislation would be the Children's Act of 2005. We find that children are neglected, children are physically and emotionally abused, and this act protects children from all kinds of inhuman and degrading behavior on the part of adults. The last piece of legislation is the National Education Policy Act. No person shall administer corporal punishment or subject a student to psychological or physical abuse at any educational institution. Now, that is the legal framework that supports good behavior, good conduct on the part of adults in the teaching environment. Going right down to the school level, we also have certain policies which are developed by the school. This legislation developed at the school must be in line or aligned to the legal framework.
So if there are reports of alleged corporal punishment in a school situation, what is the process of reporting it or the process of managing it?
I think before I even get to that question, I'd like to very briefly explain what is corporal punishment. Corporal punishment is the inflicting of physical harm or injury to students or learners in a school environment. It takes various forms. It can also involve the psychological infringement of learners' rights, because learners are protected by the South African Schools Act and they're also protected by our supreme law, which is the Constitution. We find that pinching, slapping, pushing, making children stand for long periods of time, depriving them of love and affection, depriving them of food, and a caring, safe, secure environment in which to learn. All of that contributes to corporal punishment. So teachers out there, they need to be very clear on what constitutes corporal punishment, what legislation governs corporal punishment, and what are the consequences of corporal punishment. If we look at a student that does not finish his or her homework, or misbehaves or disrupts the teacher whilst the teacher is teaching, or whilst the students are working, teachers need to work on positive discipline strategies. Because positive discipline strategies help to build a child's self-concept and self-esteem. It doesn't always have to be a physical punishment that brings children on board in terms of good discipline, good behavior.
What are the consequences for teachers who ignore the law and implement physical punishment?
The problem at our schools is that teachers are not aware of the consequences. They do know that the South African Schools Act has abolished corporal punishment, but they do not know what constitutes corporal punishment. What would you as a parent do when you find the teacher has administered corporal punishment to your child? When your child comes home from school, you find that your child has bruise marks, has the imprint of a teacher's hand on your child's cheeks. What do you do as a parent? Firstly, you need to console your child. Secondly, you need to look into the matter. You need to go and pay the school a visit, because not all cases of children coming home with injuries are a result of corporal punishment administered by teachers. You arrange for an appointment to meet with the principal of the school, and you take your child with you, and you explain to the principal what has happened, what you have been told by your child. It might not necessarily be the truth, but it's good that you first make serious inquiries. The principal's duty is to look into the matter whether the teacher administered corporal punishment. That's very important. The principal, being the head of the institution, is in charge of that institution, and he has to ensure that the learners that attend that school are in a safe and secure environment. If it is found that the teacher has indeed administered corporal punishment, then the teacher will face the law. The consequences are, if the teacher is found guilty after a hearing has taken place, the teacher can be dismissed. But the school does not dismiss the teacher. The school reports it to the Department of Education. And another body that regulates teaching, the South African Council of Educators, are the ones that issue the so-called licenses to teachers to teach. So, if found guilty of corporal punishment, it's very important to note that you can be struck off the teacher's role by SACE, South African Council of Educators. I would like to enforce the use of positive discipline. And positive discipline deals with empowering young minds and young students with skills that build their self-esteem and their self-concept. So it's very positive in nature, as opposed to corporal punishment, which is very negative, degrading, and inhuman. Positive discipline also has to be structured. It allows for routines, it allows for direction, and positive discipline also deals with setting boundaries for the learners in your class. If you set boundaries, the chances are that they would conform or adhere to the rules of the class. How do you set rules in your classroom? An important part of setting rules is to get a buy-in from your learners. When you get a buy-in from your learners or your students, you find that they have ownership to the rules that you have set in working with them. And when you develop classroom rules, you also develop the sanctions appropriate for any misdemeanor or any transgression from the rules. So all in all, the teacher is very important in developing discipline in the classroom. And if the teacher works in conjunction with the parent and they have the same goals for the children, we will have a win-win situation.
Thank you, Dr. Naidoo, for joining us and for giving us your input. I would like to urge our visitors and our viewers to visit our website, the Knowledge for Action website, and have a look at the negative effects that corporal punishment has on a child's learning processes.